Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, joined as always by my trusty sidekick, my partner in crime. Really, the best way to describe this person is my everything. That's at Eric Dalala.
Phil, good to be with you. Victory Monday had to be rescheduled. That's why I'm wearing black.
We're mourning.
Exactly.
We're mourning. Yeah, exactly. The Broncos are coming off a 19-16 loss to the Chargers. We'll break everything down here on this episode of the Neutral Zone, Eric. We'll get into our thoughts on the game, maybe some moments where things could have gone in a different direction for the Broncos. We'll talk, of course, about Jerry Jeudy's drops, Eric. Oof.
Did that happen?
That did happen, yes.
Got it.
I thought maybe you just blacked that out from your mind. Black shirt, black it out from your mind. Don't remember that stuff. We'll also hear what Vic Fangio had to say about his drops on Monday. Maybe not exactly what I thought he was going to say, but nonetheless, we'll play that for you. We'll also get into Drew Lock's performance. Of course, he had the interception early on, Eric, but overall thoughts on his game and maybe a hint about the future from Fangio on Monday. Would you say that? Maybe seemed like he was we'll play that a little bit later on in the show too. So we'll get into that. Of course, Drew Lock versus Justin Herbert. That's what we got to talk about, right, Eric?
That's what the people want.
And that's what we're here to do.
Right.
We're here for the people.
Yes.
A podcast by the people, for the people. It's just like government.
It's just like that.
Just like that. Plus, we'll play NZ Nation's we'll play their voicemails and read their emails as we like to always do here on this Monday. So how does that sound?
Let's get after it, Phil.
Eric, let's dive in here. The Broncos fell to 5-10 with a loss to the Chargers, a 19-16 loss. A lot of moments where maybe the Broncos had a chance to win the game. If they just made a play here or there, they could have easily won that game. Just your general thoughts here, Eric.
General thoughts. Important to do that
general
for all
thoughts.
It's one of those games, Phil, where the scoreboard did not maybe reflect how well I thought the Broncos played. 7 drives across the Chargers or into the Chargers side of the field, only 1 touchdown. You start the game off with a couple of really good drives, end up with no points. Defense plays really, really well early in the first quarter, holds the Chargers, believe, without a first down on their first 2 drives, and then gives up a long touchdown drive. Those were just sort of the things where you felt, man, like this team is playing well. They're still fighting, and really not a whole reason to do that given how many injuries there are, where you're at in the season. But I was pleased with the performance, and it just wasn't reflected on the scoreboard. You go down 13-0. You do make a nice stop on the goal line to open the fourth quarter to keep things at 16-3. And again, you start to come back. We've seen it again and again that this team is resilient, but their problem going into next year, the thing they have to figure out, Phil, is how do you stop things from getting to that point? How do you bottle up some of that efficiency in good play and use it earlier in the game? Because the bottom line is, Phil, is the Chargers were a 5-9 football team coming into the game, I believe, and they were without Joey Bosa, they were without Keenan Allen, they didn't have Hunter Henry, and they still beat you. And so that's not a great reflection of overall where the Broncos stand.
Yeah, similar situation for both teams heading into that one, both 5-9 heading in, both facing a lot of different injuries. I mean, for the Broncos, it seemed like half the team was missing from what we anticipated as the roster on week 1. I agree with you, Eric. Nearly 400 yards of total offense for this team, yet they only had 3 points heading into the fourth quarter. I mean, Vic Fangio talks about doing things that winning teams do, and the Broncos just didn't do some of those things. It's not like the Chargers did anything particularly spectacular. They didn't hit any major home run balls, but they played clean football, Eric. They didn't turn it over. They were able to, get points when they needed to just find a way to get some points. The bottom line to me, Eric, is that you just can't go into the fourth quarter having scored 3 points And partway through the middle of the fourth quarter, they only had 6 points. I mean, if you look elsewhere around the league, Alvin Kamara for the Saints had 6 touchdowns, Eric. The Broncos at one point, 6 points late in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's like they're playing two different sports. And we've talked about that a lot, Eric, where, it seems like other teams are just playing a different sport here. And, it doesn't, what I see with my eyes doesn't necessarily result in what is happening in the final score, because this Broncos team was getting the ball to its weapons. Finally, Noah Fant was getting targeted. We'll get into Jerry Jeudy, but at least he got a ton of targets heading into this one. It seemed like Melvin Gordon was running the ball well, and they just didn't have anything to show for it. And I guess that's what happens when you throw red zone interception. You miss an easy field goal. Those things, I mean, that could have been like 10 points right there, and the Broncos end up losing by 3. So you can explain some of these things fairly easily.
Yeah, and I thought there were times last year, Phil, where the offense was just inept. It was unable to move the ball at all. There were halves, I think when the Broncos played Buffalo last season, and obviously Brandon Allen had to start because Joe Flacco was injured. Drew Lock was not yet off IR, but I mean, they didn't do anything in the first half. And really the game, they could not move the ball. That hasn't been the case this season, really. And it was not the case yesterday against the Chargers. The Broncos moved the ball really well. Like you mentioned, Phil, almost 400 yards of total offense, 23 first downs. They had nearly 10 minutes more time of possession than the Chargers. They played a good game. There were just, like you mentioned, those mistakes, whether it was Locke's interception, McManus missed field goal, Jeudy dropping a touchdown in the end zone. That's 13 points. And all of a sudden, maybe you're looking at, hey, we're on the border of 30 points here, and you feel much differently about the game. And we've been talking about that since the beginning of the year. That's how it was in week 1 when the Broncos lost to the Titans. I got on here and I said, it's encouraging that they move the ball. It's encouraging that they move the ball down the field. They got stopped on the goal line. They had a Melvin Gordon fumble, but at least they moved the ball. They'll get to scoring. And it's happened a little bit. We've seen some games, Phil, where that's worked. Week 8 against the Chargers, the win over the Panthers, at times against Kansas City. Obviously, they played well in the red zone. So we've seen it in waves, the same way we've seen Drew Lock play well in waves, but it just has not been consistent. And so the hope is that with a full offseason, another year of progression, that this becomes more consistent. And instead of hovering around this 16-point range, maybe when you have a bad day, it's 24 points, and then you're above 30 more often than not. I think there's reason to think that could happen given the Broncos move the ball pretty well. It's just at times they make these plays that just they can't overcome them. And they need to be a team, Phil. The Chargers didn't play well offensively yesterday, in my opinion. They had 1 touchdown. And so, everyone, and we'll get to this, people clamor over Justin Herbert, but they had 1 touchdown, but they managed to get those other field goals they needed. It was just enough. On a bad day, they were able to score the points they needed. That's where the Broncos need to get to.
And they do the little things that end up making a big difference. And Fangio cited some of that. Even the opening kickoff of the game, the Chargers returned that, and they're practically in field goal range there. Those are things that just automatically put your team at a disadvantage. Those are little things that over the course of a game really add up. It's something that Vic Fangio talked about in his introductory press conference when he was first hired. Death by inches, Eric. And some of those things are starting to cost the Broncos here and there. And in a tight ball game, that ends up being the difference. Eric, of course, it was not just the offense in this one. Vic Fangio talked about some tackling issues in some spots. Austin Eckler, the Colorado kid, had a nice final drive, busted out 2 runs that really helped the Chargers get that final just game-winning field goal for them. And he also talked about Devontae Bosby in particular. He said that at one point he benched Bosby because of poor tackling. Then Bosby begged to get back in the game, and he did the same thing again. So then Fangio ultimately benched him for the game. That was a little bit disappointing. And then Fangio also, after the game, talked about covering and playing a little bit scared, giving too much of a cushion, and at times allowing Herbert to just really drive a ball in. And I thought you mentioned Herbert not playing well, but at times Herbert was making big throws, especially on that touchdown drive, the only touchdown drive of the game for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, he played well at times. He showed his ability to move. That 4th and 8 that he picked up with his legs, got the Chargers a field goal there to begin the fourth quarter. That was a huge play. If the Broncos are able to get a stop there, maybe you're able to drive down the field and it's a different game. I would say I was pleased in general with the Broncos' efforts, just because I thought there was a chance that things could get out of hand given what happened against the Bills last week. And for as well as Herbert had been playing, and to hold him to 253 yards and 1 touchdown, that's not a poor effort. It's not the best effort that maybe you could have, but yeah, you know what? I think, well, Vic is a coach and he always wants the best and he wants to improve. I think it's okay a little bit if Michael Ojemudia is playing a little bit scared when he's covering Mike Williams, because that's a mismatch for him at this point in his career. It's not like Bryce Callahan or AJ Boye is playing scared out there. So to some extent, I think that's forgivable. The tackling obviously was Bosby. Vic had seen enough. And to me, that sends a clear effort. You're going to play to win here. You're going to continue to show that you care about winning, or you're not going to be on the field. And that's a good message to send. And I do think it's also encouraging that a guy like Kareem Jackson, Phil, who, he's in his 30s, he doesn't have, who would forgive him if, I'm trying to think what game it was, Phil. I think it was the Raiders game a few years ago to close the season. There was a run. I think Marshawn Lynch had the ball, and Aqib Talib basically was just like, I'm not getting in the way.
No, thank you.
Yeah, he was like, I'm making a business decision here. I'm not getting hit by Marshawn Lynch in week 17. It's not worth it. The Broncos, Kareem Jackson was flying up to the line of scrimmage making plays when the Broncos are eliminated from the playoffs. I think that shows this team is still playing hard for Vic Fangio, which is encouraging. And all things considered, Phil, if we had said before the game the Chargers are going to score 19 points, I would have said that's enough to get this done. The offense has to score. I said it before. They have to score in the high 20s, and even getting to 20 would have done it.
Yes, 20 points would have done it, and you would think that in today's NFL, 20 points should be just about automatic almost. It feels like. Eric, the last thing I wanted to talk about in this general part of the show before we get on to Jerry Jeudy and Drew Lock here in just a minute, I wanted to ask you, do you think that any part of Vic Fangio's mind considered kicking a long field goal? I believe it would have been about 67 yards versus the Hail Mary.
Sure. I mean, he said he considered it, and I believe him. I think if it were 65 yards or 64 yards or 60, like I do think at that point, 3 or 4 yards makes a gigantic difference, just because you've got to have seen that the guy can get it there. They showed on the broadcast that Brant McManus did not kick well in warmups. Obviously, he missed 2. He hit the same upright, Phil, which is more impressive, I think, than missing a kick, being able to hit it in the same spot. He did make 2 50-yarders, but I think maybe the combination of Brandon not kicking at his best, and then we've heard Vic talk before about the mechanics sometimes get a little screwy with Brandon when he gets to that distance. That probably plays into it, and I don't mind the decision. I get terrified if I'm defending a Hail Mary. Like anytime the Broncos have to do that, I'm like, there's maybe a 30% chance, a 25%. There's a realistic chance that this ball gets batted up into the air, and then who knows what happens. And you see it every year that 3 or 4 teams complete one of these. To me, giving your guys a chance to make the play is a better option than sending them out there for a 68-yard field goal. And granted, Drew threw it before Noah and Tim Patrick were in the end zone. It was he got blasted, so he didn't have the time to let them get there. But if Cortland Sutton was in the end zone, Phil, instead of Deontay Spencer, maybe you have a little bit better of a chance there.
I mean, the mechanics of the Hail Mary didn't quite work out for the Broncos, because how it ended up playing out was Deontay Spencer, who I believe is under 6 feet tall.
Yes.
Was surrounded by 4 Chargers players, including Mike Williams, who intercepted the ball. And that's how the game ended. I think Tim Patrick was in the end zone, but Noah Fant and Deshaun Hamilton were still running down the field. So, one way to blow up a Hail Mary is to get a pass rush, and the Chargers were able to do that on that play. Part of me was intrigued, about the possibility of McManus just trying to boot one. I mean, it seemed like he had corrected whatever issues he was having early, because he booted those 50-yarders. I think that he needs one more 50-yarder to set the season record, right, Eric?
I believe so, yep.
So maybe that's one thing to pay attention to in this Raiders game. But I would have let him just take a crack at it, because it did not seem like the effort there on that last Hail Mary was up to par.
Or you think it was an effort problem?
I mean, effort, just like it just didn't pan out.
Got it.
It didn't, not that they weren't trying. Sorry, uh, an effort in the sense of it just didn't materialize like the way
Got
they
it.
wanted it to.
I think maybe the one thing to argue for the Hail Mary is that there's more that can go right for you. Like maybe there's a defensive pass interference call. Maybe somebody gets called for holding. That happened last week, I believe, when Tampa was playing. Rob Gronkowski got held or something, and they were able to get a free field goal, I think, against the Vikings a couple of weeks ago.
Last week, to be fair, the 49ers completed a Hail Mary on the Cowboys. It wasn't a win the game situation, but it was a Hail Mary that they caught. So
right.
It does happen.
As opposed to, you put McManus out there, you get one swing at it, and I would guess the odds are lower there. And for whatever reason, Vic has consistently made that decision. We've seen a couple of times, Phil, where they've been close to that sort of range, and he's chosen to throw it. And so that might just be a Vic preference, where he would rather keep the ball in the quarterback's hands or try to get a penalty drawn or whatever it may be, as opposed to, asking for a prayer. It might have been the Tennessee game, Phil, where I think it would have been like a 75-yarder or something like that, or 70-yarder. It was close. It was a little bit longer, but it was within the same range where he said, that's just too far. And apparently it was 68 was close enough to consider, but I think the Hail Mary was the right choice.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely goes either way. The one advantage of a Hail Mary is that if you connect, you win the game.
That's a nice advantage.
If McManus happens to make a record setter, then it would have just tied the game. But I would have liked to see it. Something whimsical about setting a record like that on that kind of a play and tying it and going to overtime. That would have been a fun. Nice play by Deshaun Hamilton prior to that, where Chris Harris Jr. looks like he's going to get a pick, bounces up in the air, and then Hamilton catches it. And they're able to spike the ball.
That would have been great if they could have won after it hit off Chris's chest. I mean, we love Chris, but that would have just been there would have been something nice about that too.
There would have been something nice about that.
Yeah, it is interesting, Phil. For this is a tangent, but for as aggressive as Vic Fangio has been this year, I don't think we've seen a single fake punt or fake field goal. It was just interesting to me, because there were a couple times when I thought, maybe this is a good time to fake a punt and see if you can get something going. Certainly there have been times this year in other games, and we just haven't seen that from him. Maybe after last year's fake punt against the Chiefs, they just decided no more. We're not doing it again.
There were a couple of times I thought maybe he was going to pull that out, but yeah, he has not attempted something like that. Not too many trick plays this season for the Broncos.
No.
The toss back from Gordon against the Chiefs, that
didn't work.
That did not work.
There was kind of a tricky one. I'm trying to think. It was like a reverse to Melvin, and they tossed it back to Deontay. It must have been, because I think KJ was out at that point. That happened on Sunday. It was a little tricky, but it wasn't anything revolutionary.
Nothing crazy. Crazy. Yeah. Eric, let's move on to our next point. And for one of the reasons why the Broncos were in that situation was the drop pass from Jerry Jeudy. I really thought, man, what a cool story would that have been. He had drops all game long, and then when it mattered most, he came up with a huge play, catch down the field, but instead not able to connect with Drew Lock on that bomb just a few plays before the Hail Mary. In general, Eric, wondering, do you have concerns about Jerry Jeudy moving forward?
No. I mean, he got in his head a little bit, I think. The first two drops at the end of the first half, I don't think were a big deal. I mean, they were a big deal, but they were not game ending or game changing. He could have come back from that. I think the fact that he got so upset after that, and there was a report that he threw his helmet going into halftime, maybe that lingered into the second half, because the drop touchdown, that was a big play. And then Drew Lock looks to him really deep on a later drive, and it was overthrown a little bit, but maybe if Jeudy dives, he has a chance at it. And then again, like you mentioned on that last drive, he had one in his hands, and it would have been a tough catch, Phil. He had to adjust. It kind of you turn your hands over in a way that you normally don't on that sort of play. And he couldn't make the catch. So they were concerning plays, but I'm not concerned about him long term just because, I think his work ethic is clear. I think his talent is clear. And these, Vic Fangio tends to shoot pretty straight, I think, with these sorts of situations. And so the fact that he is not concerned, I think, is a good sign. And, Jerry has played. I know we have had varying expectations for him this season. I do think it's a good sign that he was targeted 15 times and that he was part of the offense, and that had he made those catches, he would have had 10 catches for 100 something yards and a touchdown. I think that shows that they were starting to get on the same page. So, I do have faith that he'll put it together. So lots of posts going around of Instagram comments of fans just absolutely tearing him apart, saying he needs to leave town, that he is awful, that he shouldn't be on this team. I mean, that's an overreaction, a big overreaction.
I agree with you. You mentioned Vic Fangio. Here's what he had to say on Monday about Jerry Jeudy's drops.
Well, Jerry's proven he has good hands. Now, obviously, that wasn't evident yesterday. So it's not a question, whether he can catch or not. He's just got to get back to the basics of focusing a little bit more, make sure he has it, and not let anything distract him through the process of catching the ball. Catching the ball is job number one, and then running after the catch is job number two. But he's proven he has good hands, which I think is different than some guys that have inconsistent hands and are always going to be a 50-50 catcher throughout their career. He can catch. He's proven that, and he just has to do a better job of focusing.
Eric, a couple of interesting things from Fangio. He said that Jeudy has shown that he has good hands. I haven't necessarily seen some plays that he's made where I was like, oh my gosh, that was like an incredible, how did he catch that type of thing. But obviously Fangio paying more attention in practice, maybe in pregame, times where I'm not necessarily watching Jeudy. And then he said he's just got to focus more. That was the other interesting thing he said there. And that is an area where maybe I have some concern about his focus. I don't think that drops are necessarily going to plague him his entire career. That's not necessarily something I'm concerned about. But the fact of the matter is that if he makes a couple of those catches on Sunday, they're going to win that game. That's one thing. And the same could probably be said for that week 1 game against the Titans, that if he makes that catch, then they've got a high likelihood of winning that game. So when you have two situations –
and sorry to cut you off, but if you look at the Falcons game too, Phil, there was a ball that he could have caught toward the end on that final drive that at least sets them up for a chance to win the game.
So you're talking about 2 or 3 games here where a drop pass from Jerry Jeudy has directly resulted in a loss. That is concerning to me. I mean, no matter how else you slice it, that is concerning moving forward. You've seen lack of concentration throughout the season for him where, he's running out the back of the end zone on a 2-point try. I do think that he can catch, obviously. I think that he's extraordinarily talented. There's a reason why he's so wide open. I mean, that's one of the differences between Jeudy and Sutton is that Jeudy is wide open most of the times, but he's dropping some of these. Sutton is rarely wide open, but he's making spectacular catches. If you could just morph the two of them, Eric, somehow, they would make the best wide receiver of all time. I got to work on that kind of a machine, Eric. I don't know. Maybe what are you doing this offseason?
Yeah, I think if you have them on the field together at the same time, it's kind of close to that.
That could help, yes. But I do think there's some concern there just moving forward. And like you mentioned, fans are really getting on him, especially after what he tweeted earlier this year about not getting targets. It goes both ways, Eric, where, a receiver needs to get targets to feel comfortable and feel like he's a part of the offense. But at the same time, the receiver needs to make plays so that he earns the trust of Drew Lock so that he gets more targets. It's like a give and go there. You make big plays, I'm going to go to you more. If you don't make those big plays, well, you can't blame Drew the next time he thinks twice about letting it rip to Jeudy. So I do think that the talent is there. I do think that he can become one of the best wide receivers in the game. You hear the way that defenders talk about Jeudy, his route running. We saw him put another defender on the ground after just a shake, this last game. So you know that the talent is there. It's the focus that's more concerning to me, and that attention to detail. That's something I guess you learn as you become more and more of a pro.
Yeah, and maybe it's good that this happened. This sort of game, didn't go his way. He had the 5 drops, and he can use that as motivation going into the next season. And I do think there's some sort of learning curve you have to have when you're a rookie. I mean, his stats are now similar to where Courtland Sutton was as a rookie, and obviously Jeudy was the number 1 for longer. So there's, advantages and disadvantages to both of those, where you get more opportunities earlier, but also you are facing a top cornerback for longer. But Courtland had some struggles with drops his rookie year. Noah Fant, we know he had struggles with drops his rookie year. They were both able to turn it around. And so I'm hopeful that Jerry can do the same thing. But yeah, I think with Drew, your point is fair, that you can't fault Drew now if he's deciding to go to Tim Patrick in a key situation, or if, next year, if Courtland Sutton is that guy on third down, Jeudy has to earn his trust. And I think that that's a fair thing. But I do think it's critical that he does earn that trust and they get on the same page, because you invested a lot of draft capital in this guy and you need him to pan out and show that talent that he has, which I still think he can do. I don't think this is like, this means Jerry Jeudy's a bust by any means. So, we'll have to see what happens moving forward, but there is this national perception, Phil, that Jeudy is being held back by Drew Lock. And I think that at times, certainly this week, that's not fair, because there are times when Jeudy is held back the offense with those drops. And so they both need to get on the same page. It's clear that, Jeudy had 6 catches on 15 targets. So even if he had 5 drops, that means there's 4 there that still weren't connected on, that were probably Drew's fault in some way. And so you have to figure out what's going on there. But if you target a guy 15 times, Phil, he should have 10 or 11 catches for 100-something yards instead of 6 for 68. That's not enough. And so that's where the concern is. But for me, it's more of a short-term concern, and one that I think is fixable, as opposed to something where I'm like, gosh, this is a big problem. Maybe the Broncos made a mistake drafting this guy.
No, I mean, I'm not ready to jump to some kind of crazy conclusion about determining a guy's entire future just based off of a couple of games here. I do think that the more that they practice together and get reps together, that is going to help their chemistry, and they'll be able to hopefully connect a little bit better moving forward. Eric, the last question I had for you on this point is, how do you think you approach this moving forward? How do you get him to focus better? How do you get him to make these catches? It looks like maybe there's 2 different approaches here in my mind. The Broncos have clearly tried to be encouraging to Jeudy. Hey, you've got the talent. Hey, we heard about Drew Lock going over, talking to him during the game. You're one of the best wide receivers I've ever been around. Like, you got this. You're going to be okay here. Or the opposite is maybe some tough love, which we've seen Fangio do that to Bosby. Bosby's not making the tackles out there. Boom, he's benched. There's 2 approaches there. What do you think? Do you think he needs to get some tough love here and just say, hey, until you get this corrected, you're not going to be a part of this offense like this? Or do you say, no, the better way to do this is just play your way through this? And we saw him make a couple of big catches, Eric. So maybe playing his way through it and getting more comfortable out there is the other approach.
Yeah. I would say the difference between those 2 situations is that, to me, Bosby's issue was effort, that he was not giving the effort he needed to give to tackle well. And certainly you saw that on a whiff that he had after Vic put him back in. I think it wasn't Eckler, it was 82, one of their tight ends, catches the ball, and Bosby kind of threw his shoulder at him, and that was his attempt at a tackle. That's effort, and that wasn't good enough. Jerry is making the plays. The focus has to get better. I just think that maybe, Phil, in that particular game, the focus was not there initially, and then it spiraled once he kind of got into his head about it. And so I don't,
But couldn't you argue focus is effort, though, like trying to focus?
Well, but I think toward the end, it wasn't a lack of focus. I think it was just he was in his head, and it becomes a situation where everything is just now harder to, his mechanics looked a little off, like I mentioned. Everything just became harder than it needed to be. I mean, it was clear, especially on that last one, how badly he wants to make those catches. So yeah, I think in this case, you got to let him play it out a little bit. You want him to rebound. It'd be great if he could come back against the Raiders, have 5 or 6 catches for a touchdown, and kind of get this out of his mouth. That would be important. And there's a time for tough love, Phil, I think, but I don't think it's right this second.
Yeah. I do think that it got to his head, and the best way to handle maybe a mental block here is encouragement. I don't think that if you give him tough love with a mental problem here, I don't think that's how you get over it. You got to be encouraging and help boost his confidence a little bit.
And when you talk about, building through some stuff as a rookie, part of it is that Jerry's been so good for so long and played for a really good program at Alabama that if he had a drop, it probably didn't matter. They were probably just going to come down the field and score anyway, or, it wasn't going to spiral out of control. Maybe there's not the negative attention because you win so many games. And I think when they played LSU last year, he had a drop and he did get some heat for it, but that's a very rare occasion. And I think he's figuring out that in the NFL, when all these teams are close, every play matters a little bit more. You're not going to blow anybody out like you did in college. The microscope is even, thicker than it is in Tuscaloosa, Phil. So he's got to get used to that a little bit.
So you kind of brought up another point though here is that he has had some drop problems. So, yep. I mean, it is something that to just keep an eye on moving forward, I guess. We know that he's capable of the big play and he's a spectacular route runner, but some of these little things, maybe an off season of work is going to help him get through this. And, maybe that's extra time on the jugs machine. Maybe that's extra time on the practice field with Drew Lock this offseason, a mix of these things. But one thing is for sure is that Hamler also has had a similar thing in the past. Maybe the two of them can just get together and spend some extra time focused on this,
I think Hamler's hands have been fine for the most part.
He did have that one drop at the end of what was that, the Chiefs game?
Yeah, I don't know if I would. None of those, you can count it as a drop. None of those was as egregious as one of the ones Jerry had on Sunday. That was a tough play. And I think we've seen, you mentioned, you haven't seen Jerry make a ton of tough catches. I've seen KJ make those catches where it goes across the middle and it's high and he's still found a way to get it. But Jerry's just going to have to figure it out.
Hopefully just having another guy with you out there, another young guy who you can bond with and kind of maybe they can have some competition on catches or something like that just to get them focused, locked in, and just, build that muscle memory, I guess. Because Jeudy after the game even said he never had a day like that ever. So, hopefully whatever mental issues are going on there, they can move on from. Eric, let's move on this show too. Part of Judy's drops affecting Drew Lock's box score stats. Maybe he had a couple more touchdowns if some of those passes are hauled in. We mentioned this on the Broncos postgame show yesterday, but Eric, just the eye test after watching that game, where do you feel like Drew Lock is compared to a guy like Justin Herbert?
I mean, it's tough because I think at their best, they're pretty similar. I think that Drew can make all the throws that Justin Herbert can make. There was a play on I think it must have been the Broncos, like third to last drive or something like that. They got a field goal out of it, maybe the second to last. He threw a ball to Noah Fant between two defenders that was just incredible. It was a really, really good throw. And I tweeted, that's the type of throw that makes people think Drew Lock can be the guy. And Justin Herbert makes the same type of throws. We saw both of them use their legs. And, especially early in the game, I thought Drew had a great calmness about him. I thought he had patience. I thought he knew, when to check it down, when to take a shot a little bit down the field on an intermediate pass, when to step up and run a couple times when he faced some pressure. I thought that was great. And I thought he compared favorably to Justin Herbert, and that you thought, hey, these guys are playing really well. And to me, that's the Drew we've seen the last 3 or 4 weeks, really since the Dolphins game. That guy has been good enough to keep you in games and win games. And that this version of Drew, Phil, I still don't think is good enough to win you games on his own. He still needs a supporting cast there, and hopefully he continues to develop to get to that point. But the difference between these two guys, Phil, and I know you'll agree, is that Drew still makes those mistakes where you're like, what are you thinking? That interception, I get that people are saying like, hey, it wasn't as bad of a decision, it was more of a bad throw. But to me, it's a bad decision because you make a decision where if the throw is not perfect, that's what happens. And so to me, that's a bad decision because you're sending yourself down a path where disaster could strike. And it did strike. And they lost 3 or 7 points. And, it got rid of all the positive momentum that you had early in that game.
Yeah, and I think that Drew even said something like that after the game. He's like, that's the kind of play I just got to get out of me. Like, I can't do those things anymore. He understands that. It's definitely a decision thing in my mind, Eric, because when you're in the red zone, your mind has to work a little bit differently than when you're in the middle of the field. Just like your mind has to work a little bit differently when you're backed up near your own end zone. When you're on the ends of the field, you need to be a little bit more conservative with the ball, knowing that should I try to force this in there where I think I can make that play? Because Drew is always going to think that he can make the play. But mentally, he needs to know, is it worth the risk? Or should I just take that, get 3 points, tie the game up, and feel good about what just happened and keep playing, knowing that the whole game is in front of him? So I do think that those are things that he's working on. I was really encouraged by what he said after the game, though. He said, I know where I'm supposed to be going with the football now. He said the speed of the defenses is starting to slow down a little bit. He feels like he's further along than where he was at the beginning of the season. Those are encouraging signs to me that, hey, he's starting to get this thing. And you could tell that he's starting to get it. He's impatient. He was playing within the flow of the game outside of that interception for the most part. He was taking his time. The Broncos were moving the ball very patiently down the field. And the few times that he did try to take a shot, it seemed like the play was there. He missed Noah Fant on a little route up the sideline that could have been a touchdown, but that was the right play. One-on-one coverage with Fant on the outside there, that was where you're supposed to go with the football. And the other thing is that when Drew hits the back of his drop step, so when he's at the end of his drop step, a lot of times it seems like the ball is coming out on time. He's hitting the back of his drop step and then boom, he knows where he's supposed to go with the ball. That to me indicates significant progress because he pre-snap is knowing where he wants to go with the ball. During his drop step, he's looking where he wants to go, and then he's delivering it. That's going to help his mechanics. That's going to help his accuracy. And all of those things combined make me feel encouraged about the progress that he has. All that being said, he now does lead the league in interceptions. He's tied with Carson Wentz. Wentz hasn't played the last couple of weeks as the Eagles have gone to Jalen Hurts. So really, Drew Lock does lead the NFL in interceptions. And considering he missed a couple of games there, that 15 does not look great. Eric, I know you got a lot more to talk about this. Let's hear what Vic Fangio had to say, though, real quickly here on Monday.
I thought he made a lot of good throws. Obviously his numbers would be better if we had caught a few of them. I thought he made a lot of good throws. I thought there was some throws that could have been a little more accurate. But I haven't lost my enthusiasm for Drew at all. I think he can be a good quarterback in this league. He's shown flashes of it. He's shown periods and stretches of it. We just have to become more consistent.
So what do you think about that, Eric? I thought that was encouraging about where Fangio stands moving forward, that he has not lost his enthusiasm about Locke.
Yeah, I mean, that to me suggests Locke is the guy going into 2021. And obviously we expect to hear from John Elway next week after the season, like we always do. We should get a better sense from him of what the plan is. And there's several options. Do they say Drew's the guy? Do they say, Drew's the guy barring some sort of move or we'll evaluate things? Or do they say it hasn't been good enough from Drew and we're going to evaluate all options? The last one to me doesn't seem like a realistic possibility. Maybe the second one, I think, is probably, we're always trying to improve. We always evaluate this team. Maybe that's kind of the tone that they strike, if I had to guess. But I do think if I had to bet that Drew will be the guy week one, I think he deserves that. Just like I mentioned before, he started to play better in recent weeks. Some consistency will help him out. But he does. Well, 1 second on that. But Phil, one thing that could help Drew, like we mentioned, the stat lines don't look great. Locks next to Herbert, but if they catch some of those balls, like Vic said, you're suddenly looking at a 300-yard passing game, 350 yards, a couple of touchdowns. Completion percentage is probably closer to 60%, as opposed to where it was just north of 50. And Phil, the one thing I've noticed this year is that on rare occasions, the wide receivers will kind of bail out a bad throw by Drew or not so great throw by Drew. Last year, Cortland Sutton did that quite a bit, where there was a throw that it wasn't perfect, but Cortland Sutton still made the catch. And I think to that Noah Fant pass down the seam or down the sideline, it wasn't a perfect pass. He could have gotten a little bit more air under it and floated it to him, and then it's probably a touchdown. But it's still probably a catch that Noah Fant can make. If he's able to just stick a hand up there and get a hold of it, it'd be a great play on Noah Fant's part. But it's a play that Drew needs his guys to make some of those plays at some point, especially because you've invested so much in these young skill players. He does need to, no matter how much he says he's learning, no matter how much Vic Fangio says he sees progress, he has to get rid of these one or two boneheaded decisions that just set the Broncos back. And Phil, I think it was after the intentional grounding where Drew, he threw it and it wasn't near anybody. And it was like he forgot the rule for a second. And
Yeah.
to me, it's like you have to get rid of that because that's a play that just crushes you. And so, yes, is he going to be the guy moving forward? I think so. Has he done enough to show that? Yes. But in order for him to consistently be the guy and to get more than 2021, because I do think next year is a defining year for him, he's got to get rid of some of those tendencies.
Yeah. I mean, even one time he rolled out and he slid behind the line of scrimmage and they lost a yard,
So there are a couple of those where I think he took 2 sacks, one where he ran out of bounds and the one you're talking about where he slid, where if he just throws it away, you don't lose any yards. And instead you lost one on one of those and you were lucky not to lose another on the other one because of a favorable spot. But yeah, the awareness and situational awareness you hope starts to get better, but I don't know how you to fix that. Is it, does he need to go through more game scenarios and say, hey, if I'm in this situation, what do I do? Do I throw it away? Do I take the sack? What do I do? Because Justin Herbert took a good sack against Draymond Jones. That was the right thing to do, was to take that sack.
Yes.
I don't know if Drew takes that sack.
Yeah, exactly. Versus an incomplete pass that stops the clock.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Drew's competitiveness. He doesn't know how to prematurely end a play or something, like he's like, I don't know how to do this, because even when he slides, sometimes it looks awkward and his brace like gets caught up in the grass sometimes. And you're just like, why is this so difficult just to go down? But I do think, but that was his 17th career game start, right, Eric?
Yep.
So I do think that if, say, in a different situation, he would have just played he was at this point at the end of his rookie season, I think you would be okay. You would say, there are some promising signs here to move forward with. And I've said this before on this show. I think that you've got to allow these ups and downs and these growing pains to count towards something. He's gone through the growing pains. Let's stick through this and be there when he comes out the other side, and let's take the benefit. I think, Eric, I wouldn't be surprised if next week when they meet the press, Fangio and Elway, I wouldn't be surprised if they said, no, Drew is our guy. Much like how they've given the encouraging signs toward Jeudy for these drops. I think maybe coming on and saying, Drew is our guy moving forward, that might give him the confidence that he needs heading into the offseason to really take his game to that next level. Because if he is the starter next year, and I think that we're all hoping that he is, and that, he continues to grow, this offseason is going to be critical for him. I mean, just absolutely critical to work with Shermer, to get on the same page about everything, to work through some of these problems he's having with Jeudy, to just be on the same page with all these guys. Because, Eric, in my mind, all of these weapons should be back next season. You're talking about Melvin Gordon being back another season. Maybe you work on more screenplays with him. Noah Fant back, Cortland Sutton back, Tim Patrick hopefully back. Hopefully this unit can stay together and just really take that jump, because like we said at the beginning, 3 points heading into the fourth quarter is just not getting it done.
Yeah. And like we talked about, it's all about consistency. You have to finish drives. You have to have more drives that end in points. Like you said, you've gotten through these growing pains and you want to see the fruits of those labors, but you have to see it next year. It can't be where you're 6 games in and you're still wondering, when is this going to happen? It's got to happen quickly, which I think there's the possibility that you can turn things around, that Drew can be the guy. Like you said, Phil, I'm optimistic as you are. Thinking back on the last few years, I think if you, obviously barring, going back to the Super Bowl, I guess, the end of the season we've had Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Brock Osweiler, Case Keenum, and Joe Flacco for half a season. I think you probably still feel, even at this point, I think if you said, hey, you're going to make a decision of who's going to start for your football team next year, out of all those guys, based on what you know about them, I think Drew Lock is still the guy that you would pick. And obviously the standard is higher than that. That's why the Broncos haven't been in the playoffs, but it's not like the Broncos are just stuck with another quarterback that's not going to necessarily work out. I still think that there's hope that they can do that. Phil, I will say, you talk about the core. I'm a little skeptical Phillip Lindsay is going to be back, but that's the one piece that I think is up in the air.
Yes, Phillip Lindsay's future is definitely up in the air. That might be tough for Broncos fans to hear, but you even saw in limited time, Bellamy really showed a little bit of burst here and there and some of his speed and quickness. But I think that when you look at Phillip Lindsay's injury history, there's a reason why maybe, they say, hey, running backs don't last forever in this league, especially slider guys. Phillip Lindsay definitely on that side of the spectrum. And, he ended his rookie season on IR with his wrist injury. Now his third year in the league, also ending it on IR. So definitely not the season that he wanted. He posted a message on Instagram, I saw, that he's going to be coming back hungrier. I hope that happens, Eric, but you just got to wonder. I guess you could phrase it this way. Knowing the season that Phillip Lindsay had, it seems like John Elway probably made the right choice in not, giving him a lot of money and extending him, just being patient and saying, let me see what we got another year here.
Yeah, I think it's all going to come down to what's the decision for the first 3 games. If Melvin Gordon is going to miss that much time due to his suspension because of his DUI, what do you do those first 3 games? Do you decide we can get by with a Levante Bellamy, a Royce Freeman with a late round draft pick, a mid round draft pick, another free, like if there's a game plan there, then you have to decide with Phillip Lindsay, he's a restricted free agent. And what that means for people who may not know is you can tender him at a first round level, a second round level, or a late round level. And those are all there's a different cash amount that goes with each of those. If you tender him at a second round level, I think the salary is $3.5 million. So you have to decide, is he worth that? Or do you pay him somewhere in the 1-ish range, which is how a guy like a Shelby Harris would have been tendered probably in the past. Do you give him the 1-ish range? And then if some other team, which they're allowed to do, can come in and sign Phillip Lindsay, offer him a contract, do you then let him walk? And I think at that point, you might let him walk and decide that, hey, based on what we've seen, it's not worth $3 million at that position with a lower salary cap, with some other things you've got to get done with Justin Simmons. So that'll definitely be a major storyline, especially because of how beloved he is, Phil.
He's very beloved, that is for sure. And as a CU guy, Eric, I love to see my Buffs succeed. Phillip Lindsay has been really great to work with from the media perspective, and I wish Phillip Lindsay all the best. But Eric, there were some people this offseason that were up in arms about why did they bring in Melvin Gordon? Why did they do this? Think about where the Broncos would be at running back if Melvin Gordon wasn't here this year. I mean, there were a lot of games where he was the only guy producing at that position. So And I think that there was a period of time there where running backs were really getting paid, Eric, and you've seen the type of seasons that like Ezekiel Elliott has had in Dallas. You look at what happened with Saquon Barkley and his big injury this year. Dalvin Cook did get paid, and he's had a decent season. And Alvin Kamara got paid at the beginning of the season, and 6 touchdowns, like I mentioned, has been
he's
pretty
a different
good.
type of guy, though. He's not
Yes.
just a running back.
Yeah,
He's a
exactly.
football player.
He's doing everything. Yeah, exactly. Phillip, Lindsay, I'm not sure what kind of market that there's going to be for him out there. And we've even seen when he's healthy, the Broncos have to substitute in Melvin Gordon on third downs, so some of these things don't all add up to big running back money for Phillip Lindsay. So it'll be interesting to see what that market looks like for him, especially ending the season again on IR. So,
yeah. And, if they don't want to tender him, one thing you could do is offer him an extension that's just not maybe as high as someone would have expected. Maybe it's in the 1 to 2 range for 3 years or something like that to keep him around, since he is a good, valuable player. I think just maybe not the top end starter that you'd be looking for.
Exactly. And, he entered this season with a big chip on his shoulder, not getting the deal. And then also Melvin Gordon coming in, and the season just definitely did not materialize the way he had hoped. And for a large part of Buff Nation and Broncos country. So we'll see. I hope that he's able to rehab and get back on the good side of things and get going here as he heads into his 4th season now in the NFL. So, Eric, let's get into some emails here and some voicemails, and we can hear from NZ Nation. Eric, how do people leave an email for us?
They just send it on over to neutralzoneshow@gmail.com.
Yes. And our good friend Bill, he loves to send emails. He loves to have a voice here. He sent this in before the game, Eric, but it kind of gets to something I think maybe we can touch on a little bit. He thought that, if the Broncos were to win out and the Raiders lose, then the Broncos would finish 2nd in the AFC West. Of course, the Raiders did lose to the Dolphins. If the Broncos could have won on Sunday against the Chargers, that would have set up a matchup on Sunday for the number 2 spot in the AFC West. Bill, who emailed in here, was really hoping for that. He is a big Broncos fan, lives out in Northeast Oregon. So shout out to Oregon. I, of course, lived in Oregon for 3 years, Eric. My wife is from Oregon, so we spend a fair amount of time, although not in Northeast. We're spending most of our time on the west side there, Eric. But he also refers to himself as an F, as in fan. I love that, Eric. People are picking up on our inside jokes here. But Eric, let's talk about the standings here, where the Broncos are right now. I know that you love to dive into this. You love to project the schedule. You love to know what the matchups are going to be before anybody else has even thought about this. Eric, what is on the line on Sunday here?
Wow, Phil, for you to bring up the schedule without me even asking, it makes my heart grow 3 times the size. I know a lot of people are saying, hey, lose for draft standing so you can get a better pick. And I understand that to some degree. I think next year, the schedule, a loss to assure a better schedule is actually more beneficial and will have a bigger impact. So here are the scenarios. If the Broncos lose or the Broncos win and the Chargers win, the Broncos finish last in the AFC West. And what that means is, in addition to playing the AFC North next year, they also play the last place teams in the AFC East and the AFC South. So that means the Jaguars and the Jets. Now, if they finish 3rd, which would happen if the Broncos win and the Chargers lose because of some tie breaks, then the Broncos would play the Patriots and the Texans. And you'd think the Texans would bounce back because they have Deshaun Watson. I have a hard time betting against Bill Belichick 2 years in a row. So to me, that path seems much more difficult. And then there's been a report, Phil, that if there's a 17th game added, the Broncos are going to play whatever team finishes in the same spot in the NFC North. And so that would mean playing the Lions if you finish last, or the Vikings if you finish 3rd. Again, I think the Lions are a much more favorable matchup. And who knows what happens. Trevor Lawrence could come into Jacksonville and light the world on fire. But the Broncos didn't, they had to play the 2nd place schedule this year because of that win over Oakland last year. I mean, that hurt them because you're now playing a team like the Steelers and the Titans, 2 losses. So maybe this is a way that the Broncos can benefit a little bit from an easier schedule, help them ride that wave to a wild card berth or a challenge for a division title or something. But I think the schedule is set up nicely for them. And of course, if you do lose, they could win and still finish last. But if you do lose, your draft pick increases. You could be as high, I believe, as 7th. So there is still stuff to watch this weekend. And you do want to beat the Raiders. I get that. But it's not all bad if you still finish 4th in the West.
Always want to beat the Raiders. And always the players and coaches obviously are going to try to win every single game. That's not what we're really talking about here. But if they do lose the game, there are some benefits moving forward. So definitely something to watch there. Eric, let's see, move on to another email here. This one is actually from your guy, and it's a little bit of a stretch. Not a little bit. It's definitely a stretch here, but this is from John Jornad, Eric. And
that's your guy.
No, that is your guy. And he says the subject line here is trade Jeudy. Oh man. This is your guy, Eric. So I'm just putting that out there. He just goes, I can't take it anymore. I know Jerry is frustrated too, but for a first rounder to drop so many balls means the analysts were wrong. Eric, oh my gosh. I don't know. This is your guy talking, so I'm just saying here. He thinks that only 45% of his balls were caught this year. Maybe he thought he was out for some exercise. That's a reference to some of his tweets, or one tweet earlier. He says we need to cut our losses and trade him. Eric, defend your guy, please.
I can't defend John. I understand why he's upset. I understand why Broncos fans are upset. But if you're going to give Drew Lock the benefit of the doubt and the patience and say, hey, we got to see what we got with this guy, you got to give the 15th overall pick a little bit of patience here. I mean, look at the 15th overall pick from 2019, Phil. He just got released today by the Washington football team. I mean, so things could always be worse. No, they don't need to trade him. He's going to be a valuable piece next year with Sutton. KJ Hamler is coming on. I think Tim Patrick has shown that he's a valuable piece. This receiving core, as we've said again and again, can be the strength of the team. If we look back and say this was Jeudy's low point, that's fine. It came in a year in which you're 5-10. It could be worse. It didn't cost you a playoff berth. It didn't cost you a win that really mattered. So he needs to be better. He knows that. We all know that. But stay out of his Instagram comments. Let's leave him alone a little bit, and he'll improve. Phil, at the end of the email, though, he said, if this was the only episode I would have watched, I would think Eric misses on some football trivia and Phil is spot on. Obviously, this was an anomaly. The planets must be out of alignment. I'm sure that next show things will be back to normal and Phil will be making all the laughable mistakes.
That's why he's your guy, Eric. That's why I set it up like that.
I appreciate that.
He loves you.
John. He also claims he's not the Lone Ranger, but
yes, he said he doesn't know where we got that from. Of course, he has left some voicemails as the Lone Ranger, Eric. But you're the one who outed him too. So that's a couple of bad episodes here for you, Eric. What was it last week? Jupiter and Mars were visible, I think, in the sky. So
something like that. Yeah.
Must have been what was going on with that.
It was all out of whack.
Everything was out of whack. I know that you are one with nature and astronomy and
the
everything
stars,
like
yeah.
that. The stars, yeah, exactly. So that must have been it. Must have been it.
Must have been.
Eric, let's get to a couple of voicemails here. You can leave a voicemail by calling into 707 neutral. That's how you leave a voicemail. And Eric, voicemails tend to be a little bit more positive, which that's something I'm personally a fan of. And definitely our guy, Brandon from Iowa, always keeps it positive here on the neutral zone.
I thought Drew Lock did another incredible job of trying to give his guys a chance to make some plays. I feel pretty bad for Jerry Jeudy. He had a game in his hands right then and there, but some bad drops and some untimely drops. But you know what? That's how it goes. I guess sometimes you have stars all over the league to do that. Come back and make a good game. So let's go beat the Raiders, fellas. Go Broncos.
Eric, see, he's positive. He says stars all around the league make these kind of plays, and he's hopeful that the Broncos are going to beat the Raiders.
was short and sweet from Brandon from Iowa.
It was a little bit shorter of an email or a voicemail from Brandon. Normally he goes on for a little bit there, but he said, "Hey, Jeudy had the game in his hands, made a drop. It's okay. Stars do that. Let's move on, Eric." I like that. Thank you, Brandon. Brandon, I'm sure you're pumped up about Fant's big game, back-to-back big games here from Fant. So, Hawkeye. Is it Hawkeye Nation, Eric? I don't know what it is.
Not to disrespect Brandon from Iowa, but I'm not big on the Hawkeye train, so I'm just
You're gonna remain quiet.
I'll let that one slide. Yeah.
Is that due to your allegiance to cats?
Yes, cats
Guy.
Yeah.
Got it. Eric, let's move on to another voicemail. This one from our dear friend Jeff Flanagan.
Jerry had a tough game today. Obviously it's not on him, but I'm sure he'll overcome this. Mistakes tend to pile up, but I don't know what happened today. Those were, he had a couple out there that were just thrown on a dime and couldn't pick it up. It's disappointing, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to see that, this loss isn't because of Drew Lock's poor play. I don't think so. Obviously, Jerry's going to figure it out. We took him number one for a reason.
Eric, even though Jeff sounded like he was down, he was still looking on the bright side of things. He said, look, this wasn't Drew's fault, this game. That's a positive. And he said, Jerry's going to figure it out.
I like how we're now at the point where we're happy when we lose, but it's not Drew's fault. It's a big step in Drew's development that the Broncos lost, but it was somebody else's fault. That's a lot of rationalizing going on. But no, Jeff, I give you a hard time, but I think it was a good performance from Drew. He played pretty well. Again, you got to knock out these boneheaded mistakes, particularly the one at the beginning, the intentional grounding. But he's looking every week more and more like a capable quarterback that can be your guy. So that is a good sign. You just like to see it maybe with a win.
Eric, when there's losses on the field, you got to find wins elsewhere. So however you do that,
victories,
however you can find that, I think that's good. Eric, a little bit of a special last voicemail here. Our dear friend from ESPN, Adam Schefter, called in and left a voicemail.
Hey, gentlemen, Cody Ward here. Just want to say thank you guys for your awesome coverage all year long on the Broncos. Really appreciate your insight. It's been a rough season in terms of just the Broncos' offensive excitement, but I tell you what, there's a lot to look forward to in 2021, and I look forward to seeing you guys at training camp this summer. Appreciate you guys. One more game to go. Can the Broncos beat the Raiders at home?
Eric, I don't know why Adam referred to himself as Cody Rourke at the beginning of that, but maybe some sort of a mix-up or something. I don't know.
You love that joke. You like that one a lot.
That or Benjamin Albright. He does sound like Benjamin Albright. Cody is a dear friend to the neutral zone here. We love it when he calls in, but his voice sounds so much like Adam Schefter and Benjamin Albright.
That's true. I was a little confused. He said, thank you both for your insights. What insight have you provided this year?
I provide a lot of insight and entertainment.
Maybe that.
Yeah.
That's true.
You don't think I bring anything, huh?
No.
How are you going to say something like that to me? It's the holiday season here, Eric, and you're just going to just crush me.
That's true. Huh? How long are you going to keep that tree up?
That there have been conversations in the household about what we want to do with the tree. Eric, I don't know if you agree with this. Do you feel like it's bad luck to leave it up into the new year?
Oh, I think it can stay up through New Year's, but it's gotta be gone probably by the college football final. You got that first week of January, and then it's gotta go.
Yeah, your calendar revolves around sports. You're like, this is
until the holiday season are announced. It can stay up. Otherwise,
got it.
And it's gotta go.
See, we think it's bad luck when the clock strikes midnight on Jan 1, it can no longer be up.
You think the Broncos have been leaving their tree up too long?
This Christmas tree is a 2020 Christmas tree. I'm leaving it in the past there.
Got it.
And so should the Broncos, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Let's just move on to 2021, Eric. That would be great. We will have another podcast here before the Raiders game. We'll dive into that. And then maybe after the season, we'll do what were they called? The Zonies? the
Yeah.
neutral zonies. Maybe we'll make that show all about that. But maybe the episode this Thursday, which is New Year's Eve, maybe we'll make some what do they call that when you
Resolutions.
resolution?
Gosh,
That's the word.
You're back.
Resolution. Maybe we'll make some of those for the Broncos. So if you'd like to be a part of the show, we mentioned you could leave an email or you could leave a voicemail. You could also hit us up on Twitter at Eric Dalala with an A. Very strange. At Phil Milani with a PH. Probably even weirder, if you ask me. You could also leave a comment right here on the Broncos YouTube page. You can watch the Neutral Zone now. So if you're like, hey, normally I listen to you guys while I'm working out, but because it's snowing outside, I don't really work out outside as much. How can I still be a part of NZ Nation? Just watch us on YouTube.
Yeah.
You could check out Eric's beautiful skyline of New York behind him there. So I don't know what that N helmet is, but
yeah, who knows?
Not really sure. Kind of confusing if you ask me. So we'll be back on Thursday, but until then, for Eric Dalala, I'm Phil Milani. You've been listening to
The Neutral Zone.
This is Bronco Batman, and you're listening to The Neutral Zone.